was 27 when I moved into that shoebox of an apartment above an old restaurant in Atlanta. Rent was suspiciously cheap, and the landlord gave me the sales pitch about historic charm. What he really meant was it smelled like fryer oil no matter how many candles I lit, and every surface creaked like it was held together with tape. But I was bartending then, barely scraping by, and when you're living tip to tip, you don't argue with $500 a month. I finish my shifts at 2 a.m., snag a leftover burger on the way home, and drag myself up the narrow staircase that led to my apartment. I'd kick off my shoes, crack a beer, and put something dumb on the TV until I could sleep. The walls shook when the freight trains rolled through, and the floorboards vibrated when trucks hit potholes outside. I got used to noise. So when I first heard the scraping, I thought nothing of it. Just rats. The building was old, and the restaurant downstairs had been closed for years. God knows what lived in those walls. It sounded like claws dragging across the underside of the floorboards, maybe even something chewing. I laughed about it to a coworker the next day. "Guess I got new roommates," I said. But the noise kept happening, every night around the same time. Scraping, dragging, then silence. Once I swore I heard the flick of a lighter. A week later, after another shift, I dropped onto the couch, cracked a beer, and set my plate of fries on the table. Then I heard it again, right beneath where I sat. I stomped the floor with my heel like an idiot, hoping to scare off whatever was down there. The sound stopped. I thought it had worked, until I went to the kitchen for ketchup and noticed one of the floorboards near the fridge was slightly lifted, like someone had pried it up and set it back. I crouched down, ran my hand across it, and felt fresh scrape marks along the edge. The wood dust was too clean to be old. That night, every time a truck passed outside, I thought it was something moving under me. The next day, curiosity tugged at me all day, and by nightfall, I couldn't help myself. I had to see for myself. I wedged a screwdriver under that loose board and pried it up. What I saw wasn't rat droppings or old wiring. It was cigarette butts, fresh ones. A couple of crumbs. Looked like bread or crackers. Someone had been sitting under my damn floor, smoking and eating. In case you're wondering, I smoke too, so I couldn't smell it over the smell of my own cigarettes. My stomach turned when I realized the butts were still stained with yellow, like they hadn't been there long. And when I looked closer, something down there was lit. The restaurant's kitchen. It was supposed to be dark, locked, abandoned. But I could see a soft glow, and it was glinting off the stainless steel like someone was walking through with a flashlight. I slammed the board back down, shoved my fridge against it, and sat there with my phone in my hand for 20 minutes, trying to figure out what the hell to do. The next day, I asked the landlord if anyone was supposed to be in the restaurant. He said, "Nah, place is shut tight. Probably your imagination. Rats chew wires, lights flicker. You know how it is." He grinned like I just told him a joke. I knew I wasn't imagining it. When I got home that night, 2 more boards looked like they'd been lifted and reset. That's when I started noticing little things out of place in my apartment, too. A fork missing from the drawer. My lighter moved from the counter to the windowsill. Nothing stolen, nothing big, just enough to let me know someone had been up here when I was gone. I decided I needed proof. Bought a cheap motion detect camera off Amazon, battery powered, and set it up to face the gap in the floor near the fridge. First night, nothing but static. Second night, camera triggered at 2:24 a.m. I pulled up the file the next morning, excited and terrified. But the footage there was nothing. Just a low sound of scraping, then nothing. Third night, Success. The feed showed the kitchen, dim and grainy, and a figure circling the room in slow loops. Head down, hands in pockets, pacing like he was walking a track. My stomach flipped when I zoomed in. I stared at that footage for an hour, hoping I was wrong. But whoever was down there wasn't just some random squatter. He'd been in my apartment, digging through my stuff. That night, I parked my pickup at the side alley, facing the restaurant door. Around 2 in the morning, I saw the glow again through the kitchen window. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the side door. The padlock was still looped, but hanging loose. Not latched. I pushed the door open and stepped into the kitchen. Then there was a breath behind me. Just behind me. Or maybe it was the wind pushing through the vents. I spun around fast, with the light shaking in my hand. Nothing. Then came the slam. A door deeper in the restaurant banged shut. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hall, then silence. I bolted. Cops showed up 20 minutes later. They swept the place, found candy wrappers, more butts, a pile of cans in a corner. Squatters, they said. Could be anyone. I showed them the camera footage. One officer frowned. Looks like a trespasser, yeah. Probably homeless. We'll keep an eye on it. That was it. No follow-up, no arrests. I moved out a week later. Left half my stuff behind because I couldn't shake the thought of some guy pacing under my feet, listening to me eat, sleep, breathe. To this day, I won't rent a place above a business. Don't trust it. I've seen what lives in the cracks. I was living in Buffalo while grinding through my second year of nursing school. My apartment was one of those places you take because it's cheap and close to campus, not because you love it. Drafty old house, chopped up into 3 units. Mine was on the second floor. 1 bedroom, squeaky radiator, creaky doors, and just enough space to pile textbooks on every surface. You didn't thrive there. You adapted. One habit at a time. Every night, I'd grab an energy drink from the mini fridge, prop my laptop on the kitchen table, and stay up way too late, highlighting notes until the words blurred together. The glow of my screen was usually the only light in the place after midnight. The radiator hissed, the wind rattled the windows, and I'd have the noise of the fridge to remind me I wasn't completely alone in the silence. I wasn't the type to spook easy. Nursing school had already fried my nerves. Most nights I was too tired to care about noises. But then, one night, the attic fan came on. It was just after 3 a.m. I remember because I'd promised myself I'd quit studying by midnight, and like always, I blew right past it. I was hunched over pharmacology notes when I heard the whir start above me. The thing is, the attic fan was ancient. One of those noisy box units screwed into the roofline. The only way to turn it on was through a switch in my bedroom. My bedroom, behind a locked door. I sat there listening, at first thinking I was imagining it. Then it kicked off just as suddenly. Dead quiet again. I laughed it off. Great, now the wiring's haunted too. Old houses do weird things. I told myself that 3 times before I finally went to bed. The next night, it happened again, around the same time. I was scrolling notes on my laptop, and there it was. The fan groaning awake above me, spinning, vibrating faintly through the ceiling beams. This time I walked into my bedroom. The switch was still down, off. I flicked it up, then down again, just to be sure. The sound kept going. I stood there staring at the ceiling, clutching my phone like it would help. Eventually, it wound down and clicked off. I didn't sleep much that night. A A couple days later, I was dragging trash to the curb when my downstairs neighbor, an older guy named Martin, asked, "Hey, your roommate's still running those trains up there?" I looked at him. "What?" "You know, model trains. I hear them sometimes."
Welcome to Big Savings This Week at Grocery Outlet, your extreme value headquarters. Right now, get 1 dozen grade A large eggs for only 99 cents. Stock up on this easy source of protein, perfect for
Little electric whir, clack, clack, like tracks. I just stared. I don't have a roommate. He looked embarrassed, muttered something about old houses carrying sound funny, and shuffled back inside. The thing was, he wasn't wrong. I had heard a faint clacking up there the night before, layered under the fan noise. I'd chalked it up to pipes or maybe mice. Hearing him describe it made my whole body tense up. I tried to logic my way through it. Maybe the landlord wired the fan wrong. Maybe the switch wasn't connected right. Maybe Martin was mistaking my late-night typing for train sounds. One night, I stacked my heaviest textbooks against the hatch. It was stupid, I knew, but it made me feel like I had a barrier. It was close to finals week, and I was up again past midnight. The apartment was quiet. I didn't notice how quiet it was until the only thing I could hear was my typing. Then, out of nowhere, the attic fan kicked on. Not just the hum this time. Then came the clacking again, with a rhythm like wheels on a track. I froze. My first thought wasn't ghosts. It was someone was up there. Someone had been up there for days. I called my landlord. It was past midnight, but he picked up groggy. I told him flat out, "I think there's someone in the attic." He laughed. "Impossible. That attic's sealed. I've got the only key." "Then explain the fan," I snapped. Silence. Then he sighed and said he'd come by in the morning. He showed up with a key ring and a flashlight. I stood back while he popped the hatch. A rush of stale, warm air hit us and the smell of burnt food. He climbed up first, then cursed. Jesus. I followed enough to see over the edge. In the attic, a thin mattress rolled against the beams, a blanket, a hot plate still plugged into an extension cord. And beside it, a little plastic case with model train parts, wheels, track sections, wiring. Whoever had been there was gone. The landlord muttered about squatters, said maybe someone slipped in months ago. The police came, looked around and said, "Probably transient. He's gone now." Gone now. Like that was supposed to make me feel better. The fan never came on again, but I kept hearing it in my mind. And that clacking sound circling above me. My textbook stayed stacked by the hatch until the day my lease ended. I started studying at the library after that. Even now, years later, when I hear a fan kick on unexpectedly, I tense up. Mornings in my house are on autopilot. Coffee, cereal bowls lined up, spoons clinking, kids shuffling in still half asleep. Eli, 8, and Nora, 5, already know how it works. Weekdays aren't for cartoons, just cereal, brushing teeth, and out the door. We rent an old ranch house, the kind you convince yourself has character. 1 bathroom, no garage, but a yard with enough sun to grow tomatoes, and a fence that keeps the kids where I can see them. My landlord, Denise, lives in Ankeny and sends texts with too many exclamation points. "So glad you're in. You'll love the neighborhood." She gave me a folder at move-in with appliance manuals and a note that the previous tenant, Sharon, left it clean. That's all I knew about the house's past. A month in, it finally felt like ours. Shoes by the door, crayon art on the fridge, the dog's bed tucked under the window. You only learn the quirks of a house by living in it. How the front door sticks when it rains, which cabinet squeaks, the way the AC coughs before it runs. Little things you stop noticing once they become yours. One morning, something felt wrong. I had the kettle heating when I looked down the hall. At first, I couldn't tell why it felt off. Then I saw 3 muddy prints leading from the hall corner to outside the kids' bedroom. Big ones. Heel to toe. Crisp tread. Not the mess of kids tracking dirt. Not the stagger of a dog. Clean, careful steps. My kids were already at the table in socks. The dog hadn't moved from her bed. The doors were still locked, yet someone had walked the hall and stopped outside my kids' door. I didn't say anything to them. Just smiled and said, "Shoes, let's go." On the drive to school, I made small talk about music while my brain replayed those prints. Whoever left them had been inside minutes after walking on wet ground. When I got home, I photographed them and texted Denise, "Hey, weird thing. Muddy prints in the hall, kids asleep, doors locked. Ever had trouble with..." She replied fast, "Oh gosh, maybe a delivery person came by?"
This season, you've got places to go, people to see, and things to do. You may have already gotten vaccinated for flu and COVID-19.
Which made no sense. I scrubbed the prints off the floor, but couldn't scrub away the fact that whoever left them hadn't made exit prints. They'd either wiped their shoes or had another way out. For a week, nothing happened. I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. Then came the knock. It was mid-morning. A man stood on the porch, maybe late 50s, cap pulled low, faded t-shirt. He smiled like he was about to ask for directions. "Hey there," he said. "Sharon home?" I told him no one by that name lived here. "You sure?" he asked. "We knew each other. I used to stay here sometimes." I didn't open the door. Sharon's gone. He gave me a smile that felt cold somehow. "That's too bad." Instead of leaving, he lingered, looked toward the driveway, tested the porch railing with his hand, then drifted toward the side yard, like he was measuring the house. I closed the door and locked it, and even then, I wasn't sure I was safe. Minutes later, from the kitchen window, I saw him by the fence gate. He tested the latch like it was his own door. Then he looked at the meter box before finally walking away. I called non-emergency police. An officer came by, listened, and walked the yard with me. At the meter box, he reached under the lip and pulled out a small, dull spare key. "You didn't know this was here?" he asked. I shook my head. "Previous tenants probably left it," he said. "Or someone else knew." That cold, sick feeling crept in fast. That man had gone straight to the spot. That night, I double-checked every lock, moved the dog's bed into the hallway, and put a bat by the bedroom door. I kept looking down the hall where those prints had been. 3 nights later, the doorbell rang at 3:30 a.m. I didn't answer. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you listen harder. The same man came back in daylight a week later. Same cap, same shirt. "Tell Sharon I stopped by," he said through the door. Then he leaned close and smiled. I called the police again. The officer shrugged. "We'll canvass, but we can't post a car here." Denise had the locks changed that day, swearing she had no idea about the key. I needed a break, so I sent the kids to their dad's for the weekend and stayed with my sister. But when I came back, I knew the rhythm of the house had changed for good. Months later, I spotted him at the grocery store, 2 aisles away, reading the back of a cereal box. He didn't look at me, but I felt it anyway. He set the box down and left without buying anything. He never came back. Or maybe he did, and the cameras scared him off. But I know this. The scariest part wasn't the muddy prints or the knock. It was realizing the house had a secret I never knew to ask about. A key under the meter. A detail passed from one tenant to another. A detail that man already knew. I've always worked best at night. Most people hate the quiet hours when the rest of the city is asleep. But for me, that's when my brain feels clearest. I'm a freelance tech writer, so my house in Phoenix doubles as my office. By the time the sun sets, the desert air cools just enough to make the AC bearable, and I sit down at my desk with nothing but electronics to keep me company. My smart home setup was part of the job and part of my lifestyle. I tested apps, wrote reviews, explained how to stay safe online. Ironically, I thought I was more careful than most. That's why the first ping on my phone that night caught me so off guard. It read, "Your lock has been reset to factory settings." At first, I assumed it was a bug. Smart locks aren't perfect, and I'd written before about glitches that sent owners into a panic for no reason. But then I noticed the timestamp. The reset had happened just a few seconds before the notification came through. I hadn't touched the lock. I hadn't even gotten up from my desk. I pulled up the device log, expecting to see a system error or maybe a failed connection. Instead, there it was, in black and white, an attempted login from an IP address that geolocated to less than 300 feet from my house. I remember staring at that number as if my brain was trying to find another explanation. 300 feet. That wasn't someone hacking in from Russia or some anonymous bot trying random passwords. That was someone outside, close enough to be on my street. I went straight to the door and checked the deadbolt manually, even though the app was telling me the lock had been reset. My hands hovered over the metal, and for the first time I wondered if someone was on the other side listening. I spent the next hour telling myself it was just a system glitch. I typed up half a paragraph about it in my notes, thinking I might turn it into an article later. But I couldn't focus on anything else. Every sound seemed magnified. The AC compressor kicking on, the tick of the router fan, even the buzz of my monitor when the screen dimmed. Then came the vibration. It was subtle, like the faint rattle you hear when a heavy truck passes by. Except it wasn't the house. It was the front door. Not moving, barely breathing, I waited. The sound wasn't my imagination. Not this time. A soft tremor, like someone testing the handle from the outside. The worst part was how faint it was, as if whoever was out there didn't want me to hear. I grabbed my phone and called the Smart Locks support line. While I was explaining what happened to the woman on the other end, I kept my eyes locked on the door. The vibration came again. Just once, and I swear I could almost feel it through the floorboards. The support rep asked me to check the device logs again, and as I did, I noticed another attempt had been made. This time only a minute earlier. "That means someone is physically trying to access the system," she said carefully. I could hear her typing fast. That was all I needed to hear. I hung up and dialed 911. By the time the police arrived, the sounds had stopped. The officers swept the outside of the house with flashlights, checked the door, even looked around the yard. Nothing. They told me it was probably just a hacking attempt. And for the vibration I heard, "You sure it wasn't just the wind?" one of them asked. But it wasn't. I knew what I'd heard. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of my yard myself. That's when I found soft boot prints in the dust near the front steps. The desert ground doesn't hold impressions well, but these were fresh enough to be clear. Someone had been standing there. I called the police again, and they logged it, but I could tell they weren't taking it seriously. "Could be delivery," one of them said. "Could be neighbor kids." But I knew better. Whoever it was hadn't just stood there. They'd been close enough to mess with the lock system and try to override it. For weeks after, it felt like I was being observed. I moved my desk away from the front window. I put blackout curtains in the living room, I even started doing my work at coffee shops instead of at home, just to feel surrounded by people. Friends told me I was overreacting, that it was just a glitch with a smart device. But they didn't hear the door vibrate. They didn't see the boot prints. They didn't read the login attempt that came from just down the street. I still live in that house, but I don't trust it the same way anymore. I replaced the smart lock with an old-fashioned deadbolt and 3-inch screws in the strike plate. And every time my phone buzzes with a notification at night, my stomach tightens before I even look. Because if someone was willing to stand just outside, listening to me move inside my own house, then they already knew more about me than I ever wanted them to. I was 23 when this happened. Fresh out of college, trying to figure out adulthood, one piece of IKEA furniture at a time. It was October of 2020, right in the middle of that messy, half-locked down world where you weren't sure if you should be working from home or risking your health just to buy groceries. I had just moved into a rental house in Asheville, North Carolina. It wasn't much, but after years of roommates, I wanted 4 walls that belonged to me alone. The place was small, with creaky hardwood floors and peeling paint on the porch, but it had character. And most importantly, it was cheap. Boxes were still stacked against the living room wall, half unpacked. My bed frame hadn't even been put together yet. I was sleeping with a mattress on the floor. I liked the quiet. The only sounds at night were crickets in the weeds out back and from time to time a car passing down the main road. The first odd thing happened about a week after I moved in. I just finished shoving down some late-night takeout, scrolling through my phone when there was a knock at the door. It was already dark, so I hesitated before answering. When I finally cracked it open, a woman stood on the porch. Mid-40s maybe, shoulder-length hair tucked behind her ears. She smiled in this overly casual way that made me uneasy right away. "Hi," she said. "I used to live here. Mind if I come in and take a look around?" The way she asked was strange, like she already expected me to say yes. I laughed nervously, trying to play it cool. Sorry. I just moved in. Place is kind of a disaster right now." She watched me, studying me in a way that felt a little too long. Then she shrugged. "No problem. I just thought I'd see what's changed." She walked away without another word, not toward a car, just around the corner of the block. I stood there for a while, confused. People get nostalgic about old homes, sure, but who goes knocking on strangers' doors at night asking to look inside? I tried to ignore it, though it stayed in the back of my mind. That night, I made sure the deadbolt was locked before heading to bed. The second odd detail came the next evening. I was brushing my teeth when I thought I heard movement upstairs, just a soft creak like a footstep across wood. I reminded myself the house was old. Every gust of wind made something shift. But then I remembered I didn't have an upstairs. Technically, there was an attic, but it was crawl space sized, not meant for living. The access hatch was in the hallway ceiling, sealed with a stiff pull cord. I'd never even tugged it down. I went still, toothbrush in my mouth, listening. Another faint shuffle, then silence. My body tensed instinctively, but I told myself it had to be a raccoon or squirrel nesting. Asheville has plenty of them. Still, I didn't sleep much that night. Every time the AC kicked on, I thought I heard something above me. The next morning, I called the landlord. He sounded annoyed. "Place has been empty for months before you. If something's up there, it's critters. I'll send pest control next week." I didn't mention the woman at the door. In the following days, life kept moving. Cheap instant coffee in the morning, long hours working remote, unpacking in bursts. but the feeling that I wasn't truly alone never really left. The woman came back the next day, broad daylight this time. She knocked with that same calm smile as before. "I didn't mean to bother you the other night," she said. "I just lived here a long time, had some good memories. Thought I'd stop by again. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing." I lied. "Sorry, I'm busy right now." She looked over my shoulder into the house, looking to the boxes like she was cataloging what I'd unpacked. Then she smiled again and walked away. That night, footsteps again. This time, louder. Definite pacing above the ceiling. I called 911, whispering into the phone, "Someone's in my attic." They searched the attic thoroughly. What they found made me sick. Bedding tucked between beams, food wrappers, even a half-empty water jug, and a women's blouse. Someone, probably a woman, had been living up there. They didn't catch anyone that night. Whoever it was had slipped out, maybe when they heard me calling. The officers told me it was probably a transient who'd found the access point before I moved in. They suggested new locks, more lighting, and left it at that. I couldn't stay. Every creak of the house set me on edge. I packed what I could into my car and crashed on a friend's couch until I could break the lease. Before I left for good, I replaced the locks myself, every single one. To this day, I can't move into a new place without changing every lock before the first night. If these stories made you realize the real horror is being unsafe in your own home, smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss the next scare, and tell me how you'd have handled it. And if you think open farmland is safer than suburbia, you're about to change your mind. Click now to watch 4 disturbing farm horror stories, because wide open spaces don't always mean freedom. Sometimes they mean no one can hear you scream. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.
It was just this past fall. I live fairly close to a lot of camping areas and trails, so I went for a lot of hiking and camping trips, and often didn't even plan them. I'd find a trail real quick, pack my things, and head out the next morning. This was another one of those quick, spontaneous camping trips that I never could have expected to become what it did. When I pulled up to the trailhead, about an hour from my small town, no cars were there. I locked up my car and threw my backpack over my shoulders and started the hike. The woods were just as quiet as they always were. No signs of anyone out there. My head was clear, and I was just looking at the ground, walking calmly down the trail, when suddenly I heard crunches and cracks ahead. I looked up, seeing something move in the trees far down the trail I was on. As they got closer, I saw it was a man coming quickly down the trail, and when he got even closer, I got sort of uncomfortable. He wasn't just jogging. This guy was in a dead sprint. I moved off to the side to get out of his way. I watched him as he sprinted past me. He had this look on his face that was hard to read. Not frightened necessarily, but just sort of crazy. Like he wasn't thinking straight. His eyes seemed to be glazed over like he was looking through me, almost like he didn't even see me. I watched him for a couple seconds after he passed by, and he just continued running, so I got back on the trail and started walking again. It was so strange, though, that after maybe 30 seconds, I did a double take and looked behind me again. I felt my stomach drop. The man was far down the trail, but he had stopped running. He was standing still, staring right at me. I quickly moved my eyes back forward and kept walking, scared to look back until another 30 seconds had passed. And when I did, he was gone. Not on the trail, not anywhere. Just gone. Obviously, I wanted to get away from that guy, because he was acting pretty unsettling, especially for being out here alone with him. But after a few minutes of walking further down the trail and into the woods, I started to wonder if he was running from something, and if I was walking toward whatever it was. However, my only other option would have been to turn back and go in the direction of the guy, who kind of freaked me out. And again, he didn't really look scared of something. He just looked crazy. So I took my chances and continued hiking to the campsite. I looked behind me every couple of minutes, still uneasy about that guy, but I didn't see any signs of him. I made it to the campsite and set my stuff up. There wasn't really anything distinguishing about the campsite I was at. It really was just a spot in the middle of the trees. No campfire rings or landmarks. And usually the quiet, soft sounds of the forest would bring me peace. But this time it felt too quiet, like something was out there. I continuously wondered if I had made the right choice to stay here, rather than turning back. I kept telling myself the man might have just been doing sprints for a workout or something, and I just overanalyzed everything. But really I knew I was just hoping if I told myself that over and over, maybe I'd start to believe it. The sun got lower, and the already calm and quiet woods grew even quieter, nearly silent. Every slight rustle of leaves in the distance was easily audible. I cleared out a spot and built up a very small campfire, giving me at least a bit of light once the sun was fully gone. It had to be an hour past sundown when I heard a very familiar sound that instantly made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Footsteps sprinting through the woods, maybe 100 yards out from the campsite, too far to see anything, but I was sure it was human footsteps, not just some animal. Each step was distinct. The sound stopped after just a short burst though, like they had run a little ways, then abruptly came to a stop. And it was silent again. I thought the campfire would give me comfort, but now it just felt like it was giving me away, showing exactly where I was and making me easy to spot. And even though whoever was out there likely already saw me, in the heat of the moment, I made the horrible decision to quickly smother the fire. Suddenly, it was pitch black. I stood still, waiting for any sounds, hoping to hear the person walk away, or even run away. I didn't care as long as they left. Every minute that passed just got me more nervous though. And then it happened again. Someone sprinting, but this time directly toward my campsite, and much closer. But then they abruptly stopped again. It felt like they were so close, nearly right in front of me. I stared at the same spot in the darkness where the sound came from, until my eyes slowly adjusted and could make out the shape of a figure standing there. The person was halfway behind a tree, standing still, and I couldn't see much details of their face, but from the way they stood and were clearly looking at me, it was almost like they were observing me. Nothing a normal person would be doing, and I really couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, but I was pretty sure it wasn't the same guy I saw running on the trail. So either there were multiple people running around out here, surrounding my campsite, or this is what the man was running from. I was scared to move. I didn't want to speak either, because I knew my voice would be shaky, and I didn't want to give away just how scared I was. It felt like both of us stood motionless, staring at each other for a whole minute, until the figure started backing up. Even just a couple steps back, They had entirely disappeared in the darkness. And just as eerie, their footsteps quietly faded too. They must have been quietly walking barefoot, intentionally not making a sound. Since the moment the figure moved away, it stayed silent for a long time. My adrenaline pumping made it hard to tell just how long. It felt like hours, but realistically, I think it was probably around 30 minutes. I didn't move for that whole time. When I finally did, I knew I had to leave. I blindly dug through my backpack and got my light out, then started taking down my tent. I stayed cautious while taking it down and repacking everything. The light I had wasn't great, really just enough to see what I was doing. Definitely not enough to be searching around for the person in the woods. They could have easily been just 15 or 20 feet from my campsite still. I didn't know what intentions they had, but I hoped by leaving and not looking threatening, they would leave me alone. I started back down the trail. Although I never saw anyone again or heard any more footsteps, knowing how silent they were moving near my campsite, I was still on edge, and they very well could have been following me. Even just that thought of them creeping behind me, following me through the woods, was enough to keep my adrenaline going through the whole trail. When I got to my car, I quickly got in and drove out of the forest, not sticking around for a second longer than I had to. And it wasn't actually until the following day that I noticed some scratches on my car door, and the handle on the passenger side was broken, like it had been pulled on so hard that the latch snapped and left the handle unusable. That was the final nail in the coffin to get me to call the police. But aside from my report, it led to nothing significant. I don't know if it was the man I saw that tried to get into my car, or if it was whoever was out in the woods watching me. That single event derailed my whole love for camping, which really sucks. But with all the possibilities of what could have happened that night in the forest, I don't think I'll ever be out there alone ever again.
New Year, same extra value meals at McDonald's. So now get 2 snack wraps, plus fries and a medium soft drink for just $8.
For limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Prices may be higher in Hawaii, Alaska, and California, and for delivery.
At Walden University, get the W. Stand out the minute you start learning industry-valued skills for in-demand careers. Get the W with microcred certificates and field experience. Show off your career readiness and mojo before you even graduate. Get the W.
I was backpacking alone through a state forest. This area, and whole trail really, was regulated to where it had designated campsites that you had to reserve. However, it was a long trail. I think 80 miles if you were to backpack the whole thing. So as far as how often any rangers came through to service it was probably very rarely. The designated campsites were more for bear safety and just keeping the forest clean, as well as to ensure there's a record of how many people are out in the wilderness and for how long. Regardless, I did my due diligence and reserved 2 campsites, one at the 12-mile mark and another at the 26-mile mark. All the individual sites were very spread out, so I think the closest ones to me were a mile or so away. I made the long hike up to the first campsite, arriving midday and resting for the rest of the afternoon. During my hike and the time I spent at the campsite along the trail, I never saw a single other hiker or backpacker. It was off-season, so I wasn't surprised, but it was something I just took note of. I went to bed early and slept well that night, only waking up once to what I thought were footsteps coming down the trail. I don't remember much of it, because I fell right back asleep afterward. but I know I thought it was strange anyone was walking the trail that late. It was probably 2 or 3 a.m., but it didn't bother me enough to ruin my sleep. I woke up early, had breakfast and a cup of coffee, then packed and headed to the next campsite. The trail was as empty as it was the previous day. This hike was 4 miles longer though, further and deeper into the forest, and with more elevation, which meant I didn't make it to the next campsite until late. The sun hadn't gone down yet, but by the time I had my tent up and my fire going, it was getting dark. I still hadn't seen anyone that whole day, which at that point it was a little strange just how inactive it was. I tried to just enjoy the silence while I had the chance though. Several hours went by. I didn't have any hiking to do tomorrow, so I was staying up later. Think it was 9 or maybe 10 o'clock when I heard footsteps far down the trail from the way I came. Right when I turned around, I saw a light too. Just a small headlight, moving in between all the trees, getting closer to my campsite. Thought it was pretty crazy for anyone to still be hiking several hours past sundown, and immediately made the connection to the person I'd heard walking last night as well. Although, if it were the same person, I would have had to have passed them at some point. So how did I not see them? I figured it was nothing, but still was curious enough to keep watching the lights. The person got closer, until suddenly the light stopped moving. It looked almost like the light was facing toward me, and then a couple seconds later, it moved and veered off the trail, going into the forest away from my camp. And maybe 20 seconds later, it turned off. No light or footsteps anymore. It felt like just when the person had gotten close enough to see me or my campfire, they tried to vanish, like they didn't want anyone to see them, which was kind of concerning. Had the person just have passed by, I would have still thought it was strange for all the other reasons, but not concerning. What the hell could they possibly be going off the trail for, in the middle of the night, and turning off their headlamp? Not to mention, it was just when they had gotten in view of my campfire. I kept looking in that direction for, I don't know, had to be 15 or 20 minutes. But after the light shut off, I didn't see anything. I guess I thought after so much time had passed, the person likely set up a small campsite somewhere out there just to sleep. Maybe they had reserved a camp a couple miles north and started running behind, so with it being late, they just stopped for the night, coincidentally right near me. It still didn't explain the night before, but there was no way to know if it was the same person. An hour passed. I'm not sure why I was still awake, tending to the campfire. I didn't get tired for some reason, like my body wanted me to stay up. So I listened to it and stayed awake. Whatever the reason, I'm thankful for it, because suddenly I heard something behind me. It was a very quiet crunch of leaves just beyond my camp, like a person trying their best to take a silent footstep. It was close, too, way too close for comfort. I jumped up and looked out, but couldn't see anything. Whoever was out there immediately stopped moving. I quickly reached into my bag and pulled out my flashlight, shining it straight into the forest. Standing eerily close, just 10 yards from me, there was a man. Right away, I noticed he didn't look at all like a hiker or backpacker. The guy had normal clothes and no backpack. And strangely, he didn't move when I shined the light on him, like he hoped I still somehow didn't see him. Wasn't until I called out, "What the hell are you doing?" that he hesitated, like he was about to run, but then decided to just walk toward me. His face grew into a smile, and as he got closer, something was off. Something was familiar. I recognized him from somewhere, but I didn't know where. and then he said my name, greeting me like we were good friends. And although I was sure I'd seen this guy somewhere before, I knew that I'd never talked to him or introduced myself or anything like that. Like I'd only seen him in passing or something, and nothing more. So how did he know my name? And why was he out here creeping around my camp? I realized whoever this was had been following me. Not just tonight, but the last several nights. Long enough to have followed me all the way out to the trail and into the forest. Which explains why he didn't look like a backpacker at all. He'd likely been trailing behind far enough that I'd never notice him, and then would walk around at night looking for me when he thought I'd be asleep. The man was still smiling and walking closer as everything came together in my head in just those few seconds. He said my name again, this time saying it as if confused why I was acting so scared. I backed up and grabbed my bag. The man's face fell flat, and he asked what I was doing, now in a monotone voice. I didn't answer, strapping my backpack on and moving toward the trail. He said my name one more time in an aggressive yell before his footsteps started getting quicker. I bolted down the trail, keeping my light off to try and lose him. But thankfully, he didn't seem to try and chase for very long, running on the trail behind me for 15 seconds, but never really leaving the campsite. I walked through the entire night and used my satellite emergency phone to contact authorities while I tried to get as far away as possible, eventually meeting a park ranger several miles away from the camp I stayed at on the first night. I got out safely after that, but they never found the guy out there. He didn't have a car at the trailhead and no reservations. However, for him to get out of that forest unseen, he would have had to hike off trail probably for dozens of miles in the right direction. And in a forest like that with almost no gear, that's incredibly difficult and honestly unlikely to survive, even for an experienced backpacker, let alone for some random stalker who followed me out there and likely had no real backpacking experience. But given that I still have no idea who he is, other than someone that I'd seen sometime before, it's terrifying knowing that if he did make it out, then he could still be watching me. Who knows, maybe the times I saw him before were from him stalking me, and I just didn't know it yet. But if I'm being honest, there's a dark part of me that hopes he never made it out of that forest. A few years ago, I was in between jobs and not having all that much to do. I thought I'd rent a camper van and go on a long extended vacation. I ran all the numbers, and while I could have used my savings and flown somewhere nice for a week, with a van I could take a 3 or 4 week vacation. And I wasn't a city person either. I loved nature and wanted to get out and try camping in a slightly safer and more accessible way. I didn't know how I'd feel or if I'd be comfortable being alone in the middle of nowhere with just a tent. But being in a secure metal box with the ability to drive away felt like it'd be better, at least for my first couple of times. Anyway, I got the van and headed north to where all the national forests and free public lands for camping were. The first couple of days of traveling, I ended up staying the night at truck stops, just to sleep and continue driving. I think I was trying a little too hard to have my first campsite be some spectacular place, rather than just paying for a nice campground or something, where I could settle in and figure out exactly what I was doing. But it was on my third day that I finally had a chance to camp in the wilderness. I was on a long stretch of road with nothing but public lands for miles in all directions. there was an app I was using to try to find campsites others had stayed at, and I had a few marked on my GPS, just in case one didn't work out. But what I didn't plan for was that none of them did. Every time I'd reach one of the spots, there was nothing there. No trail, no other campers. Just nothing. I must have driven an hour on this unpaved, rugged road, failing to find any of the campsites I'd picked out. I began getting frustrated, knowing I was getting really far away and it was getting late. I felt like I was racing against the sun, because I knew once it was down, finding one of the seemingly invisible trails would be impossible. I couldn't even go on the app to look up different nearby campsites either, because I no longer had service. I would have had to drive an hour back just to find some more campsites that might not even be there. So I kept driving, and after a while, I happened to barely see a path leading away from the main road. I was already 30 minutes past all the campsites I had marked, and this was the first trail that I'd found. It looked even more rugged than the current road I was on, but the van could definitely fit. And while I couldn't check the app to see if this was a campsite others had stayed at, I figured it had to be, as it was connected to the same road that all the other ones were supposedly on. I backed up and pulled onto the trail. My headlights lit up the way as I slowly drove through the trees and down the path. It went on for about 5 minutes, and then I reached the end. Just a single, small spot, barely large enough for the van to fit in. There were no other little paths going to different campsites. It was just this one, which to me, for my first time being out in the wilderness, was unsettling. I hoped wherever I'd stay would have other campers nearby just so I'd feel comfortable. Being entirely alone just felt a bit much for my first time. I stayed parked for a few minutes, sitting in the front seat still and looking out into the woods. There was this really dreadful feeling in me about this place. I hated how alone I felt, and my gut was telling me to leave, that something wasn't right. On any other normal day, I would have pulled out, reassessed, and found somewhere else to go. But I was so frustrated that I just settled. I also thought since it was my first time being out here, maybe my mind was panicking more than it should be, simply because I was out of my comfort zone. I turned off the van and moved to the back. It was already dark out, so there wasn't much I could do outside of the van until the morning. I laid on the bed for a minute to relax after the drive. But then I heard crunching steps outside the van, and before I could even get up, there was a loud knock at the driver's side window. I'd only been there for a few minutes, so I was sure it had to be another camper. I must have missed them while driving down, or just didn't see the other campsite. I walked up to the front and saw a man standing by the door, peering through the window at me. He gave a short, sort of awkward, not trying to bother you smile. I asked if everything was okay. He said yeah, that his name was Mike and he just wanted to swing by and say hello to his neighbor before it got too dark. Now, of course, I was new to all of this, so I wasn't sure if this was common courtesy or what. A few things struck me as strange though. One is that I still had no idea where he was camping or how he was this close to where I was. And two is that it was already dark out. The sun had been down for a while. Lastly, the man was very twitchy, shifting around a lot, and his eyes constantly darted over my shoulder, like toward the opening into the back of the van, kind of like he was expecting or waiting to see someone else come up behind me, which just made me more nervous about being alone. I said thanks for stopping by, being nice, but trying to cut off the conversation because of the weird feeling I was getting. As I started to back away from the window, I noticed the man didn't move. He kept his feet planted and watched me move into the back of the van. I waited 15 seconds before peeking through the curtain, and when I did, he wasn't there. Immediately, I started looking out the smaller windows around the van, looking for any lights or something to show me where his campsite was, or even where he walked off to. Surely he had a lantern or flashlight to walk through the woods with. I was able to look out pretty much every side of the van, and I didn't see any lights at all, or see him walking around anywhere. The trees surrounding my van were all dark and quiet. No signs of a camp being nearby. I thought about leaving again, because of course it didn't feel great being alone in the middle of the woods with this guy that gave me a strange feeling. But I thought if I could just see where he went or where he was staying, I'd feel a lot safer, like he wouldn't be able to sneak up on me so easily next time. I checked out the windows for maybe 20 minutes, circling around and never seeing a thing, before I realized if I couldn't figure this out, then I would have to leave, and I really didn't want to go through all of that again. So I decided to get a better look. I went to the front, opened the door, and stepped outside. It was extremely quiet, and nearly pitch black in all directions. Even the trail I came down was hardly visible. I stood there and turned my head, looking around for any signs. I felt this looming, uneasy feeling in the air that made my whole body have chills. Again, my gut was telling me to leave, and that's when I heard a short shuffling sound from right behind me. I moved to the other side of the van and looked around, not seeing anything. The sound came from right behind me, though. I hesitated, then slowly knelt down, looking under the van. I only caught a glimpse of the man's eyes looking back at me before I jumped up and ran back inside. I heard him call out, and the van shook a couple times as he crawled out. I only got in a couple seconds before he jumped up and started banging on the door. He was still twitching in strange ways, and his eyes had a savage, animalistic, violent look. It almost reminded me of animals with rabies. That's how insane he looked. He was punching the window with everything he had. I turned the van on and started driving. I could hear him trying to grab onto the van, still trying to get in. The trail out was rough, and I really couldn't afford a flat tire or getting stuck with this guy chasing me. So several times as I was trying to get out, the man caught up and tried to break in still. But it was around halfway that I'd gotten enough distance and was able to get back to the still rugged but better road. I drove 2 hours back to a small town. I didn't sleep at all that night, thinking about what had happened. I genuinely think if I had stayed or the man had gotten in, I never would have been able to leave that forest and probably never be seen again. The look in his eyes and the crazy, sadistic behavior he had once I found him hiding still terrifies me to even remember.
Hey everybody. So, since the channel has passed 1,000 videos, I wanted to do something special and celebrate it by remaking some of my favorite stories and also releasing some new merch based on those stories, which has been fun because I haven't released merch in like 5 years, but I'm going to put a picture of the first one that's up based on this story. And if you want to check it out, I'll put a link in the description and the comment. And I also have a bigger project coming up to celebrate passing 1,000 videos. But I just wanted to say thank you all so much for being here and supporting the channel over the years. When I started the channel, it was really just like as a fun hobby, and it's become something I never thought it would ever be. And that's because of all of you, and I appreciate you all so much. So, yeah, thank you. One of the reasons I wanted to redo this story was because when I did my first one, I felt like the sound design wasn't that, well, I mean, I like doing the sound effects, but I feel like I messed it up with it being too loud. I remember there being parts where people were saying they couldn't hear me over the sound design, so hopefully I fixed that in this one. But let me know what you all think, and thank you all so much again for the support over the years, and here's to another 1,000 videos. Little Lucy Lockhart ran from her daddy's frying pan. The forest of 1,000 legs killed her and then laid their eggs. That's a jump rope rhyme my classmates used to sing on the playground in elementary school. It's really messed up that they sang that because Lucy Lockhart was a real person we attended school with. She vanished when we were in 2nd grade, so we must have been around 7 years old. The rhyme was loosely based in truth, in that the official story was that Lucy Lockhart did in fact vanish into the Lockhart Wood, 50 yards from her father Robert's house. But he wasn't chasing her or brandishing a frying pan to beat her with. I was too young at the time to understand what was happening, and it wasn't until much later that my mom actually explained it to me. It wasn't a particularly shocking story, just sad. I remember the day Lucy went missing. At least, the first day she didn't come to school. It was Monday. She went missing the Friday before. My mother told me it was a few days before Lucy's 7th birthday, and that Lucy had asked her father if she could have a birthday party at the house. I remember that Lucy and I had been in the same group of friends, and I remembered her telling us that she was going to ask her dad about having a birthday sleepover. I especially remember being annoyed that she wanted it to be a sleepover because I was the only boy in the group and was never allowed to sleep over with them. I was still excited at the prospect of a party, though, as we all were, because we knew her father, Robert Lockhart Jr., was a retired entomologist. We called him the Bug Man, and had lots of pretty preserved specimens like butterflies and beetles in cases that Lucy would sometimes bring in for show and tell. Anyway, Lucy asked her father if she could have a sleepover for her birthday, and he said no because she was going to spend her birthday at her mother's house, while their house was being fumigated. It was a normal enough reason for a 6-year-old to cry and storm out of the house. But running into Lockhart Wood was a bad idea for any person of any age without the proper equipment. Here's the thing about Lockhart Wood. Some people call it the Forest of 1,000 Legs, presumably to make it sound creepier than it already is, although it doesn't need help. There are roughly 4,000 species of spiders in America, and Lockhart Wood is a phenomenon on its own, in that it is home to all of them. Not only that, but there are documented populations of some spiders previously thought endemic only to certain countries, such as the Goliath bird eater and a couple of funnel web spiders, and some species of peacock spiders. There's that myth that you're never more than 3 feet from a spider at any given time. In this forest, it's not a myth. It's filled to the brim with spiders. I think at this point, it goes without saying that if you're arachnophobic, this story's not for you. The forest is naturally of great interest to biologists and arachnologists. But Lockhart Wood is private property, and restricted guided access to the forest was hard to come by even before Lucy Lockhart's disappearance. Afterwards, nobody could go in. Obviously, anyone could get into the forest if they wanted to. It's not fenced off or anything. But there's a steep fine if you're caught trespassing, and nobody is exactly clamoring to delve into a forest full of venomous spiders anyway. You need the right kind of boots, clothes, gloves, first aid kits, and knowledge of the forest to step past the tree line. The most common spiders at the edge of the forest are jumping spiders, various wandering spiders, and orb weavers. Most people who emerge from the forest have a number of banana spiders clinging to their hair and jackets, startled by the destruction of their webs. If visitors are allowed deeper into the forest, the spiders get bigger and they lurk on the ground. According to my mother, Robert Lockhart Jr. lived with his father in that house for a long time. They were a father-son duo of entomologists from Alabama, but Robert Lockhart Sr. had a focus on arachnology. He had bought the house and the forest specifically for its spider population, which also made it very affordable, and he usually worked from home. Robert Lockhart Jr. did a lot of work at the university 3 towns over. He married a professor there who taught evolutionary biology, and the 3 of them lived in Robert Lockhart's house until Robert Sr.'s sudden passing during a study on tarantula hawks. Lucy Lockhart was born a year later, and Robert Jr. was able to retire from teaching and live as a stay-at-home dad, while Lucy's mother continued teaching at the university. He still worked, collecting and preserving specimens, mostly butterflies and moths, and had reports published in the entomology scene, and very, very rarely led guided tours around the parts of Lockhart Wood, for a price. My mother only got to know Robert Jr. once Lucy and I became friends. She had said he didn't talk about the forest very much. She got the feeling that he was afraid of it. When he and his wife divorced, my mom suspected part of their irreconcilable differences was Lockhart Wood. She never really pried into it. After all, she and Robert Jr. only spent time together because Lucy and I spent time together. Although, I remember hoping they would get married so that Lucy and I could be brother and sister. Robert Jr. hated the forest he owned and made sure that anybody who stepped foot in it was dressed and prepared for the occasion, which is part of the reason why my mother never believed he killed Lucy when he was the prime suspect in the investigation. When Lucy ran off into Lockhart Wood that evening, my mom said Robert Jr. gave chase without hesitation, in socks, sweatpants, and a t-shirt. He must have received a dozen bites of varying severity the second he went in. He was there for hours. My mom was working a night shift at the hospital when he was brought in, delirious and swollen all over. There was no telling how many bites he'd received, and to this day, my mother doesn't know how he survived. He needed antivenom that no hospitals in the United States could offer, and when he dragged himself back home after desperately searching for Lucy in the forest, he could only self-administer so much. Maybe luck and a developed resistance is what saved him. He lost both legs below the knee, but he lived. From what my mom could gather in the weeks following Lucy's disappearance, the investigation was chaotic. Search teams entered the forest, but they never spanned it all. 2 officers on the initial search team were bitten by what was most likely a Sydney funnel web spider, and unfortunately both died. After all, the Sydney funnel web spider is otherwise found only in Australia. We don't have that antivenom at ready here in the States. Anyway, the search of the forest lasted maybe a week before branching off elsewhere. My mom says they couldn't, maybe wouldn't search the whole forest. More than one officer who searched Lockhart Wood left the force and subsequently skipped town. Those who didn't leave might as well have. They don't go out much anymore. My mom doesn't want to know what they saw in there. Lucy never turned up. It didn't take long for suspicion to fall on her father before he was even discharged from the hospital. My mom says there was a point where he was handcuffed to his hospital bed, even though both of his legs had been amputated. For a while, she couldn't tell if he was totally lucid because he would spend hours sobbing. That forest got her. Those spiders got my baby girl, is what he would say. But there was no evidence to convict him of kidnapping or murder. My mom and the parents of Lucy's other friends and mine were involved in the trial as witnesses, and they all insisted that they never had any reason to believe Robert Jr. was abusive towards Lucy or that he would be driven to hurt her. I didn't know any of this at the time, as my mom responsibly sheltered me from the details of Lucy's disappearance. But obviously, some of the other kids we went to school with got wind of some information, hence the morbid jump rope rhyme. It upset me a lot when I heard kids chanting it during recess. I was young, and I missed Lucy very much. It's been 11 years since Lucy went missing. It didn't really upset me anymore. It's just a sad mystery that I still think about sometimes. The group of friends that Lucy and I shared stayed close until middle school, and then we all branched out a bit. I don't think any of us ever forgot about Lucy. I recently graduated high school, and the original group of us got together at a diner to discuss in amazement how we were all finally done with high school forever. At one point, I nudged my omelet around my plate and said absently, "It's been years, but I still wish, man, I wish Lucy could have graduated with us, you know?" My friend Stella leaned her shoulder into mine and knocked our mortarboards together with an understanding smile.
Same here, bud. But she'd be proud of us for doing it.
The conversation drifted elsewhere, but that poignant thought of Lucy stuck with me for a long while after that evening. It wasn't until the day before I went off for my freshman year at college that I told my mom I wanted to stop by the Lockhart house and sort of say goodbye to Lucy, if Robert Jr. would allow me.
Well,
She shrugged over breakfast.
I guess it couldn't hurt. You don't ever get over losing a child. But all things considered, he seems to be okay. He might oblige you.
So, later that afternoon, I drove across town towards that dark, looming forest that stretched into the sky on the horizon. I hadn't been to the Lockhart house in over a decade, but the sight of it instantly made me happy. I no longer mourned Lucy. I only cherished the brief time we knew each other as children, and I had lots of fond memories in that house. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, I saw the curtains in one of the front windows shift, so I knew someone was home. He might not want to let me in, but there was no harm in trying. I went up to the front porch steps and found a wooden hanging of a Luna moth adorning the front door. It had no sign of grime or weathering, and the pale green paint still had its glossy finish. So I guess it was fairly new. I don't know what I expected from Robert Jr. Maybe that he was too far gone after the loss of Lucy that he wouldn't bother decorating anything, but it had been more than 10 years, and recovery is possible. I knocked, and he answered a few moments later, frowning curiously at me from the gap in the door. "Hey, Mr. Lockhart, I floundered a little, stupidly, because I hadn't planned on how I was going to talk to him. I'm Aaron Levinsky. You know my mom, Jane, at the hospital?" The door eased open a bit more, his face relaxing with recognition.
Jane's boy, yes. You were one of Lucy's little friends, weren't you? Come on in. Wipe your feet.
"I'm surprised you remember we were friends," I admitted, stepping inside and wiping my feet on the floor mat. It looked like a monarch butterfly.
I remember all you kids.
Robert Jr. said with a wave of his hand, leading me inside. His prosthetics clicked on the linoleum.
It was Lucy, you, Stella. There was 2 little girls named Hannah, wasn't there? You were the one that cried a lot because you never got to stay for sleepovers.
Yes, sir, that was me," I said, embarrassed.
You gay, son?
It was a startlingly straightforward question, tossed over his shoulder as I followed him into the house. There wasn't anything accusatory in his tone, though, so I said yes. He grunted.
Knew you'd be fine to sleep over with the girls. Could have spared you a lot of whining and crying.
He took me past numerous framed bug specimens as we made our way to his living room. It was a big room, cluttered with bookshelves and workbenches with papers strewn about. Dozens of terrariums of various sizes dotted the room and lined the walls like trophy cabinets. The only gap where the den opened into the kitchen. A bright desk lamp illuminated the whole room, and the light bounced off a magnifying visor headset and a laptop screen. It looked like he had been dissecting a large beetle before I knocked on the door. It was good to see that his passion for bugs hadn't been destroyed after losing his daughter to the Lockhart Wood.
So what brings you here, Scooter?
He asked. going into the kitchen to retrieve something from the fridge. Well, we graduated in May, and I'm leaving for school tomorrow. And I just kind of, I mean, I still think about Lucy a lot. So I was wondering if you had kept any of her things over the years, and I could see and sort of, I don't know, like, remember her by? If you're okay with that, sir. Robert Jr. came back over to me with a shrug and 2 beers.
Ain't much a little girl as to her name, but Hello Kitty bed sheets and beanie babies.
Oh man, Beanie Babies. I couldn't help but grin at the memory. That was always my go-to gift. I gave her a bunch of mine.
What, you want them back or something?
Off my startled look of chagrin, he chuckled and handed me the second beer.
I'm messing with you, boy. Her room's this way.
He led me down a long, familiar hallway, down which Lucy and our friends and I had sprinted recklessly over a decade ago. I recognized a few framed insect specimens that we had knocked from the walls in our roughhousing fits. We went into Lucy's bedroom at the end of the hall, and it was virtually unchanged from how I remembered it. The walls were still pale pink and decorated with pastel-colored cross-stitch artwork made by Lucy's late grandmother. The canopy bed was neatly made, the Hello Kitty bedding crisp and unfaded from years of disuse. The shelves upon shelves of stuffed animals, with an army of Beanie Babies gifted by me populating their own full shelf, and, surprisingly, a long terrarium against the wall with an enormous black spider sitting motionless underneath a blacklight. I recognized that spider. No way, that's not... Robert Jr. flipped on the lights, which turned off the terrarium blacklight. The massive spider retreated into a hide with a twitch of its long, slender legs. He grunted.
That's her.
Lady Legs was a type of huntsman that Robert Lockhart Sr. had discovered in the Lockhart Wood and kept for 10 years before Lucy was born. There were plenty of live specimens in the Lockhart house over the years, but Lady Legs was the only one that Lucy seemed to cherish as a pet. Robert Jr. had said in the past that some tarantulas can live up to be 25 years old, but Lady Legs wasn't a tarantula, and if this was the same Lady Legs from that time, that would make her over 30 years old. Do huntsman spiders live that long? I asked incredulously, moving to the terrarium with a fascination I hadn't felt in years. Robert Jr. stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and an expression of distaste creasing his features as he looked at Lady.
None that we know of, besides that one.
She's even bigger than I remember, I murmured, my breath fogging up my glasses as I tried to peer into the spider's hide at an angle, but I couldn't see her.
Far as I can tell, her size depends on her enclosure. She won't get no bigger as long as she's in that tank.
I saw Lady's leg move in the hide, then turned my head to look out Lucy's bedroom window. It faced the deep gray-green mass of Lockhart Wood. I stood, absently tracing my fingers through the condensation on the bottle in my hand. Lady came from the forest, didn't she? How big do they get in there? Robert Jr. didn't respond. I looked over at him. He was downing nearly his entire beer. He finished it with an angry-sounding hiss and said, finally,
Creativity is not something I wait for. I am Antoni Sendran, a filmmaker. I'm always hunting and hustling for ideas. Adobe Creative Cloud is
ungodly big. Anyway, take your time in here. Do what you want, look at what you want. I'll be down the hall.
Okay, thanks, I said as he started to leave. I remembered the drink in my hand and held it out to him awkwardly. Hey, I'm not 21.
Ain't nobody gonna snitch on you.
He left the room and I opened the beer. I don't know how long I spent in there, meandering around fondly. Maybe an hour? I took a spider Beanie Baby off the shelf and held it as I looked around. I stood over the dresser, looking at the framed pictures on top of it. Most were of Lucy and her parents, a few of Lucy from toddlerhood to age 7, holding the gargantuan Lady Legs in her comparatively tiny hands. I was in a couple of pictures too, group pictures of us and our other friends at birthday parties, our messy little faces smeared with cake. I found an old elementary school binder from the first grade class Lucy and I had together, where the first activity of every day was to make an entry into our journals, following a simple prompt given by our teacher, and then draw a picture to go with it. Naturally, lots of Lucy's entries were about Hello Kitty, playdates with me and our other friends, and bugs, like her outrageously mangled spelling of the word centaur, and several entries about herself and ladylegs as spider lady centaurs. After a while, I just stood at Lucy's window, looking out at Lockhart Wood as I finished my beer. I'm a lightweight when it comes to alcohol, so I was pretty buzzed. The Forest of 1,000 Legs had never looked so eerie. The angle of the late afternoon sun didn't penetrate the darkened woods, but it glistened on countless spiderwebs suspended alongside the tree line, emphasizing how dark the forest was beyond that. It was strangely inviting, in a predatory way, like the lure of an anglerfish. How it had swallowed Lucy up. Movement outside the window caught my eye. I looked over and saw Robert Jr. standing under the carport facing the forest, downing another beer, a backpack hanging from his shoulder. He was dressed in different clothes from the flannel shirt and cutoffs he'd been wearing when he let me inside. He was wearing a heavy jacket and hat, with a different set of prosthetics that had shoes. He looked like he was dressed for going into the forest. I left Lucy's room, crossed the other end of the house, and through the screen door of the kitchen. Robert Jr. didn't respond to the wooden rattle of the door banging shut. You're going in?
I ain't been in there since I lost Lucy. Think it's about time I go back in one last time before I torch it.
The sun was hidden behind Lockhart Wood, but not quite set, casting the house and us in shadows. And before I could stop myself, I asked, "Can I go with you?" To this day, I'm not sure why I wanted to go with him. Maybe for a sense of adventure, of danger that 18-year-olds are attracted to and think that they can survive anything. Maybe I had some stupid notion that we'd find Lucy in there, dead or alive, and maybe I just didn't want a guy who had lost his daughter the last time he was in those woods to go in there for the first time since then alone.
It's dangerous in there,
said Robert Jr. It wasn't a no. I'd be with you, I said, dumb and optimistic. But in my defense, he let me go with him. Neither of us mentioned it, but I know he didn't want to go into the woods alone either.
You'll need to be dressed right,
was all he said. And the next thing I knew, he was jamming a hat on my head, layering me in protective clothing a size too big, and cramming my hands and feet into gloves and boots a size too small.
Not a perfect fit, but close enough,
he said, tucking my baggy pant legs into my boots. I had zipped the jacket most of the way, but he yanked the zipper all the way up to my chin. He told me it was his gear from when he was younger and his dad had bought the property. He strapped a headlamp to my head and did the same for himself, and shrugged on a backpack that was filled with a first aid kit and a cold pack for antivenom. I watched him put it all together, fascinated as I nursed another beer. It was hard to believe he hadn't ventured into the forest in more than 10 years. The speed and certainty with which he prepared everything was like that of someone who explored Lockhart Wood daily. He gave me a set of strict, reasonable rules, basically telling me not to leave his side and not to thrash around if I walked into a web, and to always watch my step, even though I was wearing boots. I could change my mind at any time in the forest, so if I wanted to leave, he would guide me out of the forest. I sent a quick bly of a text to my mom, telling her that Robert Jr. had invited me to stay for dinner, and then zipped up my phone into a breast pocket. By now, twilight was fading. The purple sky soon turned to an inky blue, and we set off. The trail leading into the forest was rough and overgrown from years of seeing no foot traffic, but not completely hidden. The first thing I did when entering the forest was walk right into a web that Robert Jr. had subtly avoided. I started to flail instinctively, but Robert Jr. caught me with an arm across my chest, saying,
"Don't thrash," I said.
After he assured me the web didn't belong to anything venomous, I carefully picked the web from my face and hair, following him deeper into the wood. It was darker than I anticipated beneath the trees. there were a few spots of visible death in the forest, suffocated and deprived of light under thick layers of web wrapped around them. But most of the forest looked healthy, supporting the spider population symbiotically. Robert Jr. and I switched on our headlamps pretty quickly when the scant moonlight didn't light our way sufficiently. I looked down at the ground, casting a wide circle of light at my feet, and immediately froze in place, my skin crawling horribly. Spiders the size of $50 were scurrying away from my boots in droves. Not quite a swarm, but enough to be uncountable.
You're all right, son. Those ones ain't gonna hurt you.
Robert Jr. hadn't looked back at me, but he must have heard me freeze behind him.
You want me to take you back?
Pride swelled higher than the fear in my chest, so I said, No, I'm fine. One of the spiders crawled slowly over my boot, its long legs probing curiously at my laces. I wrenched my eyes away from the ground, shook the spider off violently, and pushed forward. I've never been particularly arachnophobic, but it was impossible to not feel itchy all over, imagining hundreds upon hundreds of unseen spiders creeping into my protective clothing, slipping down the collar of my shirt and edging along my scalp into my hair. The tiny spiders became less of a presence, however, when we came to a fork in the trail and Robert Jr. dropped to a sudden crouch, grabbing my sleeve and yanking me down with him.
Look at this,
he whispered, his headlamp fixed on a spider not 2 feet away from us.
This is a nasty one.
A spider the size of my hand stood strangely before us, with 2 sets of thick, hairy legs thrown in the air. It might have looked silly if not for the vivid, violently red jaws on display, pulsing angrily in our direction. Worse still, the spider continued to move, swaying gently with its rosy calicula, throbbing almost obscenely, inching infinitesimally closer with its side-to-side motions. Wide-eyed, I whispered back, "What is it?" Infuriated by the sound of my voice, the spider lunged closer. This time I could see its fangs protruding from the red, quivering with rage and glinting with wetness.
Brazilian wandering spider. P. ferra, it looks like, but it can be hard to say without a closer look. Only live in South America, except for this place. You know.
He unzipped 2 pockets and withdrew a large pair of gloves to slip over the ones he was already wearing.
They might be the deadliest in the world.
Instinctively, I shrank back, but then took hold of Robert's jacket sleeve with popping eyes when I saw him reach towards the spider. Don't! The spider struck at his 2 fingers with lightning speed, and a force that made a sharp snapping sound pierced the dark woods around us. In the blink of an eye, it struck twice, a red-brown blur. Horrified, I tugged frantically at Robert Jr.'s sleeve.
Relax,
he said, pulling his hand back and showing me his intact glove.
Hoss can't quite bite through these.
The spider darted out of our joined headlamp beams and off the trail into the woods. Robert Jr. removed his bulky second pair of gloves and stowed them away.
Can't do much delicate handling with gloves like that, but anything else, and those fangs will go right through.
He stood suddenly, leaving me crouched and trembling. Clenching and unclenching my fists, unpleasantly aware of how thin my gloves were now, I stood slowly. My headlamps lit up the trees in front of me, where the bark seemed to shiver and shift with the traffic of smaller spiders oozing up and down the trunks. I turned my head to see where Robert Jr. was looking, and my light fell on his back several meters away as he moved down the left path in the fork. "Wait!" I squeaked, rushing after him. I stumbled over tree roots and ran haltingly, skidding awkwardly to step around more than one fat, lumbering tarantula as I made my way back to Robert Jr.'s elbow. Our headlamps bobbed in the darkness, and my gaze was drawn further up, where the lamp's beams lit up vast, labyrinthian webs high overhead, where nothing on the ground could destroy them. Glinting white gold in our light, they shuddered in an imperceptible breeze. "Those webs are way better high up there," I said, with a breathless chuckle, trying to shake off the anxiety from the Brazilian wandering spider. "We won't walk into any down here." Robert Jr. walked briskly, barely acknowledging me with a grunt. While I looked all around me, casting my headlamp's light to and fro, Robert Jr. hardly moved his head, focused steadily on the twisting path down which he led us. Occasionally, he would stop so abruptly that I would collide with his back, and he would gaze up into the ever-thickening treetops at the spider webs overhead, which were now so large and thick that massive sections of leaves had suffocated and died. I could see clusters of spiders creeping every which way in the stuff, while more obscured movements shifted on the other side of the web, so thick that I couldn't see what it was. My depth perception was off in this environment. What with the distance between myself and the webs and the number of different sizes of spiders I could see, everything looked bigger up there from where I was standing.
Communal webs,
said Robert Jr., pointing at the massive net of silk.
Most spiders live alone, but some are social. Bunch of different spiders taking care of the same babies, sharing the same food.
They must catch a lot of prey, I said, moving my headlamp over the vast web. It's huge.
Wouldn't be surprised if they make a regular meal of birds. Squirrels, too, maybe, if any wander in this far.
I looked at him, bathing his subtle shadowed face in yellow light, and said slowly, That's kind of a big spider, isn't it?
P. blondie in South America has been known to eat birds. It's the biggest spider in the world, at least outside of this godforsaken forest. This place ain't like the rest of the world.
He paused, a muscle jumping in his jaw, and then said,
But they don't make webs. They live in burrows. So watch your step.
I resisted the urge to clamp onto his arm like a child as I swept my light over the edges of our path. The spiders littered the forest floor, scurrying busily, but the irregularly spaced holes along the path and nestled between tree roots were what made me nervous now. The biggest hole looked like it could have swallowed my leg. We continued to walk, uninterrupted by the webs for the most part, but there were a few low-built ones that I would walk into when I was staring into the woods, and Robert Jr. wouldn't tell me to duck. Unnerved as I was starting to get used to the sensation, hardly jerking back when the sticky, feather-like string snuck up on me. My pulse would still spike when it happened, though, pounding loudly in my ears as I carefully brushed the webs from my face. But then Robert Jr. took us down a second fork in the path. When I collided with two webs of surprising density in a row, I finally focused on Robert Jr. ahead of me to complain about not warning me, and a tangle of silk lit up my flashlight centimeters away, just in time for my face to crash through it. Even though it was my fault for not watching where I was going, I said testily, "Come on, Robert, at least give me a heads up." As I dragged my gloved hand down my face, raking the web from my skin, Robert Jr. said nothing. I looked up over his shoulder in front of me and saw why. The trail was entirely choked in web, a glistening haze like morning fog stretching farther ahead. Shapes twitched within it, different from the shifting masses of hundreds of smaller spiders in the first communal webs we saw. These were heavy and singular, with sharp angles plucking at individual lines of silk. I couldn't quite make sense of what I was seeing. Something crunched under my boot. I looked down at the wispy, stringy gray floor. Brittle, old bones of some animal I couldn't identify lay there. Among the bones lay the aged, empty remains of a huge tarantula, skeleton and exoskeleton locked together in death. Had they fought and died together, tangled with one another? Jesus, I said loudly, just as Robert Jr. breathed softly.
Jesus.
He wasn't looking down. He was looking directly up. I looked up too and froze. Our flashlights joined and lit up the webs that swallowed the understory, washing over the enormous spiders that moved within them. Things the size of fish bowls, with fat, round abdomens and twitching, creeping legs thick as pool cues. Clusters of eyes reflected light back at us, and the movement of their heavy bodies made meaty, organic clicking sounds. These things weren't what Robert Jr. had commented on. The creature slowly descending from the web by a thread was, at first, I thought it was a spider with a squirrel or a rat or something in its jaws, but a small, logical corner of my mind reminded me that that's not how spiders eat. Not even tarantulas who don't wrap their prey in silk. The rodent appeared bisected, as I couldn't see its back legs, with ugly gray skin visible around its midsection like it had mange. Its back half was impossibly the swollen bulb of a spider. It looked like some gruesome mockery of a centaur, the limp torso of some parasitic rodent bursting forth from an unwitting host. There was no way that this thing could be real, or if it was, it couldn't be alive. But the thing's spinnerets kept pumping a hardy silk line, two spindly black legs touching at delicate lips as it worked its way down, and the rodent's head twitched, its furry front legs extending, paws grasping. I saw its face, a squirrel with too many beady black eyes extending up from its head, blinking down at us. I could see its long yellow teeth as its mouth lolled open. I was distantly aware of my body moving, weakly grasping Robert Jr.'s jacket sleeve and yanking on it. His voice sounded very far away as he murmured,
What the fuck?
Movement in the corner of my eye somehow managed to pull my attention away from the abomination above us. My eyes were drawn down to the edge of the trail on which we stood, and for a moment, I thought the ground had dipped down in embankment and we were simply elevated on the path. But I soon saw that it was a massive hole in the ground, a burrow. I continued to tug on Robert Jr.'s arm.
What the fuck?
A face peered out from the burrow, ghostly pale against the darkness within, and seemed to drift up and out closer to us. It was a human face with too many eyes clustered across the bridge of its nose, glittering back and blinking slowly. It ducked its head, long dark hair hanging in lank tangles, as a woman's bare moon-white torso emerged slowly from the hole in the ground. A hulking, hairy mass of a spider's abdomen the size of a Volkswagen Beetle followed, connected at her waist. Her 8 branch-thick legs crunched in the leaf litter, audibly thumping with the weight. Robert Jr. and I staggered backwards, upsetting more spider webs in the underbrush. The creature's legs were striped with white at their joints, and I thought of Ladylegs back at Robert Jr.'s house, and what he said about her species' size in the wild.
Ungodly big.
Robert Jr.'s thoughts were also back in his daughter's room, because as his hand gripped my arm in return, I heard him say,
Lucy?
My eyes flew back to the creature's face, its unnatural addition of eyes surrounding the originals, and as it tilted its head, I recognized her too. Her mouth dropped open, lower lip dripping with something too visceral to be saliva, and her rail-thin arm spasmed once more before lifting up, sending a painful jolt of electric fear up my spine. Her white, long-fingered hands took hold of the squirrel spider dangling between the two of us and herself. The thing squeaked and convulsed, its legs thrashing horribly, and Lucy brought it to her mouth. I ran. I thrashed my way blindly through web after web, back the way we came. I heard Robert Jr. call my name unexpectedly close behind me, and suddenly felt him crash into my back. I hit the ground hard, face first. I barely had time to register the bright starburst of pain as my nose broke and began to bleed, or the scattering of spiders millimeters in front of my eyes before Robert Jr. yanked me back upright and whirled me around. I thought he was slapping me, but realized he was swiping away spiders that I'd picked up as passengers from the ground.
Don't you run off in here, boy!
Robert Jr. hissed in my face, shaking me hard.
Something else will kill you before...
The enormous creature loomed behind me, creeping down the trail after us. I started to yell, but Robert clapped his hand over my mouth, spinning to face her. He forced us into a sort of half-crouch, his body weighing me down to keep me from running again, and I stared with bulging eyes, struggling to breathe through my bleeding nose as Lucy bore down upon us.
It's okay,
Robert said, but he wasn't talking to me. I could feel him shaking against my back.
It's okay, Lucy. You're okay.
She came closer, the precise movements of her vast spider body in stark contrast against the limp, feeble movements of her human torso. Her face seemed alert, even with the 6 bleary eyes that looked infected in their unnaturalness, but her arms hung listlessly at her sides, her posture hunched. Venom, blood, saliva flowed slowly down her chin, all that remained of the squirrel spider. I could hear her breathing, see her pale throat throb as she swallowed.
That's a good girl, baby,
said Robert, his voice low and soothing despite his violent trembling.
Daddy didn't know you lived here, Lucy. We didn't know we'd see you here. You did such a good job here all by yourself, didn't you, baby? Daddy's proud of you.
He was slowly inching us back as he spoke nonsense to the thing in front of us. The spider shifted minutely, almost moving after us, but not quite. Lucy's dark, wet mouth dropped open. In a voice that sounded like wind and dead leaves, she hissed, "Daddy." Robert Jr. laughed, wild and terrified in my ear, pulling me another step back, the palm of his hand still crushing my lips against my chattering teeth.
That's right, baby. Daddy's here. Daddy didn't think he'd see you all grown up in these woods, huh, baby? Good girl, Lucy.
She didn't move after us as we backed away, although her eyes followed us with a laser focus. Again, her voice hoarse and vacant.
Lucy. That's right, baby. Daddy's gonna take your friend back home, okay? You remember Aaron?
I groaned behind his hand, sick with fear as all 8 of Lucy's eyes shifted onto me. She didn't say my name. Wildly in the back of my head, I wondered if she recognized any of the things Robert Jr. was saying to her, certain that she was all spider like this, that the 2 words she'd said were empty repetitions preceding her final attack, but still she stood motionless, watching our retreat.
Daddy's gonna take Aaron home. Is that okay, baby? Will you let me do that, Lucy?
She was silent for a long moment. Then,
okay. Good girl, Lucy. We're going away. Good girl.
Another long stretch of silence as we moved steadily away from her. She still didn't follow, merely watching us. Her voice, unprompted this time, shook me to my core when it next creaked through the night.
See me.
The noise Robert Jr. made was something of a strangled sob and a laugh.
Yeah, baby. I'll come see you. I'll come see you again. Just let me take Aaron home and Daddy will come see you again, baby girl. Okay.
We were several meters away from her by now. I was sure we were nearing the bend and the fork in the trail we had taken. Slowly, Robert lowered his hand from my mouth and I gulped a deep, shaking breath.
I can't get us out of here backwards, but I need you watching behind us. You hang on to me and I'll walk you out. You tell me if she follows. Can you do that, son?
Wide-eyed and unable to look away from Lucy's figure down the trail, I nodded. Yes, sir.
Okay. Careful now.
His hand encircled my wrist tightly, and with a firm tug, he took us around the bend. I struggled to walk in reverse, my legs like rubber and my pulse roaring in my ears. Lucy didn't follow us once I lost sight of her. Robert Jr. navigated us back through the forest, avoiding all webs this time around. I don't know how long it took to get out of the woods. For all I know, it took days. But eventually we broke through the tree line, and the unobstructed moonlight was blinding. I felt separate from my own body as I brushed harmless jumping spiders and orb weavers on my hat and jacket. Distantly, I heard Robert Jr. chuckling weakly. I turned around to look at Lockhart Wood. Almost occasionally, I leaned over and threw up on the grass. A few yards away, Robert Jr. did just the same, coughing and laughing harder when he was done. I watched him gasp and fall heavily, giggling maniacally. Dazed, I went over to him and sat beside him on the grass, staring at the forest. I spat remnants of bile on the ground between my knees. I fumbled with my flashlight, turned it off, and threw my hat aside. I peered at Robert Jr.'s tear-streaked, laughing face, vaguely concerned. I can't tell if that's good laughter or bad laughter.
You and me both.
He pressed 2 fingers to his neck, checking his own pulse. What are you going to do now? I asked weakly.
Shit, Scooter, I don't know. Probably visit my daughter every now and then. Damn.
He scrubbed his hands over his face, groaning deeply. My head swam. I flopped backwards, staring at the night sky. The stars looked like little white spiderlings. I thought suddenly of my mother back at the house, and for whatever reason, all I could think to say was, Hey, so I was thinking, you should give my mom a call sometime. She's not seeing anyone. I don't remember getting home that night. I don't remember getting settled on campus the next day, but I think I'm going to change my major to biology. I'd like to see Lucy again, and I think maybe a study in arachnology might be a good place to start.